I'd like to indulge myself and talk about one of my favorite series of all time, which, in my opinion, far too few people have played. Ace Attorney for the Game Boy Advance is a series in which the player defends those who've been accused of murder in court. By exposing contradictions in their testimony and performing your own investigation, the murderer is always revealed and their elaborate plot to frame your client is foiled. The series is text-based and offers only a handful of animations. There's a fair bit of reading, and there's not much to look at, really. The storytelling of Ace Attorney has to be very strong and engaging throughout, and I'd like to spend some time picking apart this clever and engaging storytelling in the trilogy's final case, Bridge to the Turnabout. This is technically the last case of the last game, so I'll have to explain the events which have led up to this so that things make sense contextually. The first trilogy of games features Phoenix Wright, a defense attorney. Phoenix was a pupil to the legendary attorney Mia Fey. Mia died in the second case in the game, some 3 years prior to this case, Bridge to the Turnabout. Also of tremendous importance to this case is Phoenix Wright's relationship with Mia Fey's younger sister Maya and little cousin Pearl. Phoenix Wright is their guardian, and they're quite important to the player, accompanying you on every case. Many years before that, in her first case ever, Mia defends a convict named Terry Follows, who is actually innocent of the murder she was defending him of and the murder he was convicted for 5 years prior. In both incidences, the real culprit was one 19-year-old Dahlia Hawthorne. The short version of it is that Terry Falls and Dahlia Hawthorne staged a kidnapping for ransom at an important location, Dusky Bridge, in which Terry Falls took the heat for and Dahlia Hawthorne escaped innocent. Sometime later, Dahlia Hawthorne manipulated yet another boy and was at the center of yet another murder. This would be her and Mia's final confrontation in court, in which Mia proved that Dahlia Hawthorne was guilty of murder. After this, Dahlia Hawthorne was sentenced to death. The boy Dahlia Hawthorne manipulated and tricked was actually our protagonist Phoenix Wright some years before he became a defense attorney. These trials are actually presented to the player as recollections from Phoenix Wright, who's reading the files many years later as an attorney. These stories all wind together over the course of 3 games and 60 hours of trials to form a narrative that comes to an unresolved point upon the final case, Bridge to the Turnabout. There's tremendous visual storytelling in a very small pan down the shishishito. The audience gets an excellent sense of how the previous cases wind into this one, and there's a general impression that there's something waiting at the bottom of the sword. We wonder whose silver thread will be cut. Maya, who's come close to death already? Pearl? Will Phoenix himself die at the end of the trilogy as his mentor and so many others have? Finally, the episode starts. Maya asks if Phoenix would take her and Pearl to a spiritual hotspot tour so that she can train as a spirit medium. Yes, Maya is a spirit medium, as is Pearl's and Mia, their mother and aunt. On the pamphlet is a familiar face, which confuses Phoenix Wright before he agrees to go. It would seem that Dahlia Hawthorne, who should be dead, is a nun at this temple. The three enter the temple and meet a few characters like Sister Bikini, a nun, and Miss Elise Thonim, a children's book author. Both characters are vibrant and full of personality. This is where the chapter gets quite clever. The implicit rules of the Ace Attorney games are to meet a set of characters after a murder, which every single time will be asked to testify in the upcoming trial. Ace Attorney doesn't waste any narrative space. Every character you meet is absolutely relevant in one way or another, and often characters you've already met will find themselves wrapped up in a case a game or two or later. No character is animated that won't participate in the trial. While you're not sure what the trial is for, it's a given that both Sister Bikini and Miss Elise Danim will participate. It's even easy to visualize the sorts of animations they'll have behind the witness stand. At this point, the case is still in an intro, but there's an uneasy resting anxiety about who's going to die in the case. It would happen that Elise Danim is a famous children's book author, and Pearl is quite familiar with her. Elise mentions her apprentice is somewhere at the temple. Pearl leaves with Elise to go cook dinner, and Maya and Phoenix take a look around. They find themselves at a bridge connecting two parts of the temple. Diegetically, neither Phoenix or Maya know where they are, but the player recognizes this location as Dusky Bridge, which I mentioned earlier was the last murder in this game. The player's sense of unease is furthered. Another important note for later in the chapter is that Phoenix is notably frightened to cross. Phoenix and Maya make their way into the inner temple and meet the other nun, the one that the Phoenix and the player are so curious about. The player is almost certain that they know who it is, Dahlia Hawthorne. She's wearing a hood though, and it's hard to be completely certain. She introduces herself as Iris, and she and Phoenix have a strange interaction. The gears turning in Phoenix Wright's head seem to be visible and line up well with the player's confusion and unease. Why is Dahlia here? Why is she alive? Why is Dusky Bridge involved? Most importantly, who's going to die? Phoenix and Maya run into a very familiar character present in 4 cases now. As I mentioned, Ace Attorney isn't shy about reusing characters. The 7 of the characters convene in the main hall for dinner. At this point, the game seems to feel like a murder mystery. All the characters have convened. The rules of an Ace Attorney game say that someone has to die, and you're going to defend somebody who's innocent. The odds are good that somebody Phoenix cares about will die, and there's a non-zero chance that something will happen to Pearl or Maya. Maya leaves to start her training, and Bikini asks Iris to go ring the lights out bell at 10. Pearl leaves with Elise to go read in their room. The rules of the text say their murder will happen tonight, and both Maya and Pearl are gone. Passes you late at night, asking if you've seen Pearl, who never came to her room. The resting anxiety in regards to who's going to die to put this case in motion suddenly focuses in on Pearl, who may really die. Iris appears, and for the first time, Phoenix is allowed to talk with her. This isn't really gameplay or puzzle solving yet, it's world building. This is the important point I'd like to make. In this moment, you're allowed to interact kinetically with her. She takes off her hood, and any doubt about her identity fades. Her hair is a different color, but this is Dahlia Hawthorne. There's a brief exchange, but before Iris leaves, Phoenix asks how she knew his name and asks if they met before. Psyche locks pop up, which indicate in the language of the game that she has something to hide. Again, this isn't gameplay, but it communicates storytelling effectively in the language of the game. Suddenly the bell tolls, and a visual cue from the opening moments rip across the screen. It sets in that Miss Danim is dead. Bikini tells Phoenix to run to the phone on Dusky Bridge. To walk in on the crime scene is rare, but what follows is formulaic. Call the police, begin investigating as the defense attorney. You run to Dusky Bridge and see something shocking. The typically static hand-drawn background has completely changed. Dusky Bridge is on fire for reasons unknown. Again, this communicates something being very wrong in a tremendously subtle way. A murder in Ace Attorney is par for the course, but running to a familiar scene and having it visually change dramatically signals something very wrong visually. Suddenly you're worried about Maya, who's on the other side of the bridge. Phoenix, who was frightened to cross the bridge in working conditions hours ago, tells Lair to call the police and runs across the bridge. To be continued. This marks the end of part 1. The storytelling is what's so potent about this first 30 minutes of the case. In a game about courtroom drama, 30 minutes of characters just standing still and talking is very hard to tell in a compelling way. The important story beats are all punctuated by small, familiar kinetic flourishes. Iris takes off her hood and it enters the inventory. The temple is thrown into chaos and something may have happened to Maya, and the familiar Dusky Bridge is ignited in flames. Phoenix asks Iris if they know one another, and Psyche locks appear, indicating that she's lying. These typically appear during an investigation when someone's lying and the important part of the investigation is getting them to fess up. But these psyche locks aren't possible to interact with. They're form, and they suggest something narratively in a way that text can't. Another subversive trick that this chapter pulls is killing Miss Elise Denim. This may not seem like a very surprising twist, but in the context of Ace Attorney having played so many games in so many cases, there's a set of expectations as to how you interact with a case. In a vacuum, this isn't necessarily engaging, but to the player who spent so much time with these games, this is very subversive and interesting. It seems to be against the rules to meet a character that we expect to meet in court and then have them die. Not once does the game explicitly threaten Maya and Pearls, but the subtext is clear, and to suspect that something is wrong in this case is more frightening than knowing. This wouldn't be the last case of the trilogy if someone dies with no foreshadowing or stakes. And this is precisely my point. These small narrative flourishes are what make this last case so magical. The introductory sequences are often engaging for a short while, but the process of shuffling around story beats with no agency before the trial and investigation begin can get boring. This almost 30-minute sequence manages to establish major narrative and thematic points effortlessly. Narratively, the most important points to be investigated are immediately clear, and more importantly, they're presented non-diegetically. As a player who at this point has played about 12 cases, the player is naturally curious about standard questions like, who was the woman murdered? Why was she murdered? And then of note is, who's the girl in the hood? Where are Maya and Pearl? Why are so many familiar paths crossing at an all too familiar crime scene? The opening pan down the Shishi sheet, though, is tremendously relevant thematically in tying up this final case, and the series as a whole. We've seen this Karain statue, a harbinger of death, before, and we've seen more deaths in the series than there are branches on the blade. In every game, every case, time and time again we have to fight what seems like a losing battle for justice. And in all the panels we see along the blade, we see threads weaving to form the fabric of this case, the final case. And now, being thoroughly concerned for Phoenix and invested in this case, the game can start. This is my argument for Ace Attorney. While this case is a ways into the series, I'd like to make a case for you watching this video to play these games. They've been ported to the Switch and mobile. The whole trilogy is about $15 and it's lasted me very many years. Even if you're not interested in games in general, the Ace Attorney series is magnetic in ways that those who don't play games especially would find engaging. Being on the App Store, there's really no good reason not to play them. They're silly and unrealistic, but tremendously lively and full of personality. They're well written in the ways that count, and most importantly, they're all consistently fun. For such a silly game that has little to do with real life, it's very poignant and well spoken in its closing moments. It's only natural for living creatures to fight to protect their own lives. But what makes us human is that we fight for others. But who do you fight for? How hard must you fight? That's the true measure of what human life is worth. We defense attorneys are warriors who are constantly challenged by that question. Even when the battle is over and the bonds that connect us are severed, we always return, time and time again.